All right, we're going to start your first sample in your sample book. Make sure that your name gets on the front cover and on the back cover. This will also show you how each one is going to be graded in your final score at the end. All you got to do is turn to the first page, and you'll see that there's instructions on this side, and then there's a place for you to staple your sample on this side. So we're going to start with the very first one, which is our 5/8 inch seam allowance. On each of these samples, you'll see at the top it says required materials or materials needed. So for this sample, it says we need 2 3x6 rectangles and a threaded sewing machine. Also notice over here is the fabric key. It'll tell you which side is right side, which side is wrong side. In other words, which side should be touching at the end. So I'm going to get my fabric. I have 2 pieces here of my rectangles. We're going to read through every step, and it's important that you don't skip any steps. A lot of people think that once they've sewn, they're done, but make sure you read through every single one. It might be helpful to take a pencil and check them off as you go so that you know you've done that one. All right, so our first instruction says lay 2 3x6 rectangles of fabric together with the right sides or pretty sides touching. So when I look at my fabric, I can see that it's patterned on both of these sides. Here's my 2 pieces. When I take it apart, I can see the difference between the right side and the wrong side. So this first sample says that I need to put right sides touching. So when I take my 2 samples, I put them pretty sides or right sides together. And I line them up so that they're exactly the same, just right where they were. The next step says to sew a 5/8 inch seam down a long edge, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So if I look at my sample, I've got a short end, a long end, a short end, a long end. I'll know which one end to sew because remember, fabric always goes to the left. So when I place my fabric in the machine, I'm going to find the 5/8 inch line, which is right here. Luckily our first one, the 5/8 is printed on our stitch plate. So I'm going to take the edge of my fabric, line it up on the 5/8 inch line. My fabric goes to the left. I'm going to reach behind the machine and lower the presser foot. So the presser foot is pushing against my fabric. Before I start sewing, before I just put the pedal to the metal, one tip that I would suggest is that you twist the hand wheel towards you so that the needle goes in the fabric. It'll kind of hold the needle there, then reach behind and pull the threads backwards, and that'll kind of keep them from getting jammed up. All right, we're ready to start our first sample. So I'm going to get my foot pedal and put it on the floor. Make sure that the tall end is near your toes so that it kind of makes an incline. Use your right hand to hold the fabric down below and your left hand to kind of guide it on the left side. Remember, you are not pushing the fabric, you're not pulling the fabric, your hands are guiding the fabric. The number one thing you need to watch is that the edge of your fabric stays on that line. Don't watch the needle, don't turn and talk to your friend. Watch the edge of the fabric on that line. And remember, our instructions also say to remember to backstitch at the beginning and the end. So here I go. I'm going to go forward slowly. I'm going to backstitch, so I'm going to hold in the backstitch, keep it held in while I press on my foot, go backwards, and then go down the edge of the sample. Nice and slow. Remember, you're watching the edge of the fabric on the 5/8 inch line. My fingers are just guiding. They're not pushing the fabric or pulling the fabric. When I get to the end, I'm going to backstitch a couple stitches, go to the edge. Now I'm done. So I reach behind, I pull my fabric out to the left, and I swing it through the thread cutter on the side. So now I have a pretty straight line. Now I'm not done yet. I need to continue reading in my sample book. So step 3 says trim all threads and press the seam allowance open. So let's trim first. I'm going to take my shears and I'm going to trim the threads, make sure they get into the garbage. And then it says to press the seam open. Press is the same thing as iron. So I'm going to take it over to the ironing board and I'm going to open my sample and open my seam allowance. Remember, the distance from the seam to the edge of the fabric is the seam allowance. So I take it to the iron and I press it open. And I'll show you how to do that on the ironing board. All right, here I am over at the ironing board. Here's our first sample with our 5/8 inch seam. It tells us to press it open. So I'm going to open the sample and press the seam allowance open. Now when I'm using the iron, be nice and careful. You don't want to burn yourself. There is a steam button that will produce extra steam to really give it a crisp press. So when you're done, you can see that my seam is now pressed open. I want you to staple it with this side up so that I can check the width of your seam allowance. And that one's done. All right, we're ready to staple your sample into your book. For your 5/8 inch seam, you're going to place it with the wrong sides facing up with your seam showing so that I can grade it. Make sure you only staple through one page. Take your stapler and just staple right at the top. You don't need very many.